Ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to begin. Please take a moment to silence your mobile devices. We would like to remind you that food and drink are not permitted in the theater. Also, please note that photography and audio and video recording is prohibited. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Haight-Monick. I am Senior Director of Public Programs and Events here at the New School. And on behalf of the New School, I'm delighted to welcome the New York Times and tonight's special guests back to the university. This is our 50th event with the New York Times since 2003. Our collaborations with the TimesTalks reflect the New School's dedication to addressing pressing cultural and social issues and supporting creative expression in the arts, social sciences, and the media. Now, to begin tonight's program, please welcome Michelle Gray, Creative Director of the TimesTalks and the New York Times Live Consumer Events.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Gray, the Creative Director for the New York Times live conversation series TimesTalks. For 20 years, TimesTalks has paired New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, theater, music, art, social justice, and literature. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event with Jill Soloway, the Emmy-winning screenwriter, director, and author, and Hannah Gadsby, star of the award-winning stand-up show Nanette, as they discuss Soloway's upcoming book, She Wants It, Desire, Power, and Toppling the Patriarchy. Soloway's latest memoir follows their evolution from straight, married mother of two to identifying as queer and non-binary. With unbridled insight that offers a rare front seat to the inner workings of the Me Too movement and its aftermath, Jill captures the zeitgeist of a generation with thoughtful and revolutionary ideas about gender, inclusion, desire, and consent. Moderating tonight's conversation is Jessica Bennett, the gender editor for the New York Times and author of the best-selling book, Feminist Fight Club. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jessica Bennett, Hannah Gadsby, and Jill Soloway.
Thank you for being here. Good welcome.
Yeah, super exciting.
So I want to know before we get started, you have kind of been on tour together a bit. The book came out today. Here it is. How did you two meet?
We have met. Okay, I was doing a show at the at the Soho Playhouse, and you came along. And how are you going with yours?
Oh, that's for you.
Thank you. And immediately they noticed that I need help to hydrate, and yeah, I think you probably should help out.
Okay.
This answer.
Yeah.
I kick-started it there.
Yeah. Well, we at Topple have an imprint called Topple Books, and I was reading the New York Times, paper of record, and we were looking for queer, intersectional, interesting folks to speak to about book writing. This was before you were famous.
Yep.
Got in just in time. And read an article that said something like, a great new voice in comedy emerges, or something, the Jason Zinnemann review of the show.
I mean, I'd been doing comedy for a while.
So I think I took a picture of it and texted it to somebody at work, and I was like, I should meet this person for maybe the book, and kind of didn't really think about it after that.
Me either, I didn't even know you did it.
And then it was a big
This is a great story.
It was a big, big week for the Soloway family because we were actually premiering the songs from the Transparent musical at Joe's Pub that my sister had written. And so Transparent is going to become a musical movie. We're debuting it next year, and we're shooting it in the winter. So that night, that week, we were workshopping the musical. We were having processing sessions with the actors from Transparent. It was also Pesach. And so yes, it was a quick, okay, I'm going to meet this Hannah Gadsby person, and went to see Hannah's show and was just so blown away. We had breakfast the next morning, and
I mean, that was a big thing for me, to take a breakfast meeting after a show. That was a big effort.
it was a big deal, yeah.
Yeah.
It was snowing.
I mean, we don't need to paint a picture. But it was snowing.
Yeah. And yeah. And became friends after that, and just realized, yes, we both have a lot of things in common that we like to talk about, things that generally annoy other people.
I think it overwhelms people. Like, it was nice to meet someone who, in the course of small talk, you're talking about consent and
Rage, patriarchy,
Yeah.
consent before the coffee had
Yeah.
come.
So let's talk about the book.
Okay.
It's called She Wants It. We were chatting backstage. A lot of people have asked why she, but I actually want to ask why it. What is the it? Before I actually cracked the book, I was like, okay, is it like reproductive rights? Is it equal pay? Is it Hillary with the presidency? Is it like not having to wear a shawl in an air-conditioned office because air conditioners are set to a male body temperature?
Yes, it's that one.
What? What is it?
I guess, yeah, that's the question of what it is. I mean, I think the reason I named it She Wants It, even though some other names had come to me as I was working on it, including some unused titles, were Will You Still Love Me If? That Maria.
Lana Del Rey took that one, though.
Did she?
Yeah.
Maria Shriver told me, that's a great book title, use that. But I didn't. And it was also at one point going to be called What Are You Doing to Get What You Want? Which was kind of about some of the acting techniques that we use at Transparent. But She Wants It, I realized was the perfect title when I was looking through some of my old papers, and found that I had made a documentary proposal in my early 20s for a film called She Wants It. I was working as a production assistant at Cartemquin in Chicago, which is an amazing documentary house, and really felt like this was the movie I wanted to make, this question about desire and consent. I was already thinking about gender and desire and consent, even though my parent hadn't yet come out as trans. But I was really just kind of like alive with the idea that there was something about female and feminine that made it really difficult to be believed about whether or not you were consenting. And when I saw that, like, oh God, I've been thinking about this for so long, and that She Wants It has that dual meaning. She Wants It can be said from one man to another, pointing at a woman to insult her or even to justify sexual violence toward her. In fact, you find out lots of things when you try to Google the name of my book. It's that idea of men saying to other men, pointing at a woman and saying she wants it. So it's really about a conversation between two men, that phrase, she wants it. And then for women saying she wants it, I think about, like, as a director, as a filmmaker, as a writer, you go to the set and you say, I want this background, I want this actor, I want this lens, I want to see this, I want to see that. It's all about desire. So I go on these interviews where people are like, why are there so few female directors? What are the barriers? It's like our culture shames women for desire from the moment we realize that we're girls. Creating, directing, writing, it's about naming, it's about wanting, and we're not allowed to want. So that's why I wanted to name it She Wants It.
Hannah, do you have an it?
Do I have an it? I struggled with desire on any level. I had I had a pretty rough start to life. And, I often see now that I'm famous, I think was the word you used. Sometimes I feel like I'm living somebody else's dream because, you know, where I'm from and how I thought about myself and what I could possibly hope for myself, it's just not a place where someone like me could dream. It was enough to just, the best I could hope for was to be invisible. So, you know, I don't come from, you know, I'm now in a position, I find that I could, you know, I could do anything I'd like right at this very moment. I mean, it mightn't last long, but in this moment, I could say, I want to do this. And so, a lot of people go, sure. And I've not actually planned to be here. Like, I was just honestly getting by. So the idea of, you know, desire and, you know, a 5-year plan, or, you know, and in terms of my, you know, gender and sexuality, again, you know, it was enough to be seen. So, you know, I've only just gotten into a space where I feel like I have a proactive, personal sort of attack on it. So I don't have an it, but if I wanted it, I could get it, I reckon.
I want to talk about anger. I have like 5 books on my desk at work right now about female anger. Rebecca Traister's book, there are a number of them. You know, post-Kavanaugh hearings, post-Trump, Me Too, all of this I think has galvanized women and men in some way to be angry. But for a long time, I think comedy was a vehicle to express anger. And I'm actually wondering if, is that still the case? I mean,
Not for women.
Yeah.
Not for women. You know, it was, men can be angry on a comedy stage. That was fine. People trusted that. Most female comedians have to be very careful. The audience will often stop listening if you're a bit mouthy. So, you know, there was great, even for this situation, I had to be likable. So, you know, but a lot of what I was angry about, I had to tone down. I couldn't be angry. I had to work around these things, but I work with very angry men. So yes, not for me, the comedy stage, in terms of anger.
What about with Nanette?
Well, look, I've been doing comedy for 10 years. So that's how I got to be angry. And I had to say that I was quitting before I was allowed to be angry. That was a theatrical device to say, I don't expect to have a career after this. I don't expect, you know, to, you know, be liked. I don't expect. So I had to do that in order, you know, I don't have a reputation after this because nobody likes an angry lesbian.
But they do.
Well, they do now. But I had to work really hard to make that space, and I had to work really hard to be likable before I could even begin to make that space for myself. So, you know, and then I still had to look after, you know, their feelings at the end of it, you know.
So what now?
What now?
Yeah, do you still quit comedy? Do you?
No, God, Lord, no.
Is
it was,
there
like I
room
said, it was
for
a
humor?
theatrical device, much as, so, like, I quit comedy the same way that Louis C.K. said, sorry, I didn't mean it.
So what about you?
You know, I almost take issue with the idea of women's anger. And I think I started to notice this as I slowly but surely got rid of pieces and pieces of my female femme presentation and started to get to this more neutral place. And I started to find that when I wasn't thinking about how I looked before I left the house, I would engage in conversations with people where I would just bring my mind and start talking and saying these things and speaking in a way which was like exuberant and insisting and incendiary, because that's the way I like to talk. I like to think about things and see if I can get something going by. And I remembered, through my whole heterosexual life, it's like, why are you so angry? And then as a queer person, as a non-binary person, I'm not an angry woman. I'm just, I think about all of the men who passionately argue with one another about things that maybe aren't their hurt, but they're still passionately arguing. So if you're watching two people on Bill Maher or on Fox and Friends, nobody's talking about male anger.
Right.
They're just letting men express themselves, specifically over and over again. So I'm glad that women are angry, but I don't feel like we're at all actually anywhere, we're not really angry, we're alive, and we're speaking, and we're just starting.
Has the response to you in a creative sense, when you're going out and you're pitching, changed since you began presenting more masculine forward?
Well, I'm not like in a pitching situation much these days, which is really nice.
Do people still ask you to smile on the street?
No, that never happens. I don't smile for photographs anymore. I mean, all of my pictures, when I look at my pictures over the, sort of previous press, off to one side and just kind of like, I was posing like this. And Hannah and I have the same PR person. Her name is Kelly Bush, and the first thing she said is, stop turning your head. Look straight down the barrel of the camera.
Whoa.
And I stopped turning my head. And it was like a lot of photographers who would help me, I think, find my gender. A lot of times, like, there was this one photographer who I would encounter all the time on the red carpet, and I would be out there and I would just kind of like, and she's like, Jill, stop putting your hand on your hip. You're not a hand on your hip kind of girl. And I was like, oh, thank you. And I just started posing like this. And now I really pose like this, like a fucking mugshot. We're in a revolution. There's a fucking government to overthrow. You see my clothes? This isn't fucking funny. I've come to fucking tear it down. And I pose like this now. It's much better.
So in tearing it down, your production company is called Topple,
Yeah.
as in the patriarchy.
Sure. Not the guy who originated, the role on Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
A lot of people are like, Topple. Not Topol, the Israeli singer.
Has the patriarchy changed? Like, who is the patriarchy today? Are women the patriarchy?
No, I don't think women are the patriarchy.
How'd you get there?
I think women can be the patriarchy.
Oh, yeah.
I'm here to listen to.
Yeah, they're not. They're external scaffolding, but they're not the patriarchy. I don't know. I'm confused. Sorry.
Who is the patriarchy, and how do we fight it?
Well, it's interesting. So obviously we know who the patriarchy on the right is. We know it's Trump, and we know it's Kavanaugh, and we know it's all the red state dudes. But I think I had this kind of crisis of what the fuck are we doing in Hollywood when Trump got elected, because I asked myself the question, okay, every single person I know who's making content, movies, films, books, singers, TV shows, they're all liberals. Okay, so liberal people have been making content for the past 10, 20 years. Wouldn't we think by now that we have created a world that would know better than to elect Trump?
Patriarchy.
Patriarchy. Just one or two cis men in the audience. Yeah. Lost my concentration now. So, I was like, why are we bothering to make content when we haven't actually been able to change anything? And then in the work I've been doing with 50/50 by 2020, which is a strategic initiative of Time's Up, really asking the questions, who are the directors? Who are the writers? Who are getting the deals? Who is making the decision of who gets the overall deals? You look in the DGA newsletter, for example. What movies are we going to watch if you're in the DGA? 95% of them, white men, producer, director. Who is making these choices? And yes, they are liberal men, but they are still mostly white men. And what white men are doing with art making is the same thing we're doing with art making, perpetuating our privilege, creating this propaganda for our own privilege so we feel more comfortable in the world, and making people like us heroes. And that's what white men have been doing all these years.
I'd like to say that it's not a new problem. Like
Patriarchy.
White men have been writing quite a few stories for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Like I'd say all of the stories. Like if you look at, like, you know, in Christianity, the First Testament, the writer's room there was predominantly a very specific demographic. There wasn't, you know, like European men have told the story for a long, long time. So, you know, part of this is that what is Hollywood doing? It's, you know, we've been taught how to tell stories without women. Women haven't been participating in storytelling for centuries. We've been talking to each other for centuries, but history has been written without women. Stories have been told without women. Stories have been performed without women for centuries. So we're looking at something, we don't know what stories look like if we participate in them.
Yeah. And you know, this question of who is the patriarchy, and this question sometimes I hear from men, what do you want from us? Especially liberal men. We want to help. What do you want from us? And I keep saying, tell the truth about patriarchy from your perspective. And I say to liberal men, you have been in the rooms where you have been affected by toxic masculinity and the ways that alpha men make you feel like shit for not being one of the guys. And you know what it looks like and feels like when 2 or 3 men point at a woman and say, she wants it. And I've been, you know, and men are just like, you know, there's a code, they're not allowed to betray their brothers. So cis straight men, you know this code. You're not allowed to out your brothers. And so I've been on a couple of podcasts with cis men who have dared to have me on. Most people are just like, no, they don't want to book you. And have asked this question just kind of facetiously just to see what cis men say. I say, do me a favor, this thing that happens at parties, like there's a guy and then a woman is passed out and the guy wants to have sex with her because she's passed out, but he calls his friend first. What's that about? And they just like go silent. They're like, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, you know what this is. It's what men do with the degraded half of the divided feminine. They use it as an excuse. They use her past outness as a conduit to connect with other men sexually. Her past outness, her unconsciousness demands that they experience something sexually with another straight man, and it's her fault for not guarding her egg. Yeah, thought. So that's the question.
Tough one to clap. It's a good point, but it's a good point.
So the question I asked, this is what I want men to explain, is you know what this feels like when men ask other men to collaborate with you in objectifying women and using them as an object so that you can talk about them together, so you can be in sex together. Tell the fucking truth. Out your fucking brothers, and don't make women do this alone. I guess I am angry.
I mean, I've worked in stand-up comedy where quite often I'm the only woman on the bill, but because I'm more quietly woman than some, and I'm not, I don't get involved in the green room competitiveness that often happens. I can be forgotten, and I've witnessed this. Perfectly lovely men who I know, who I'm friends with, become different people when something happens.
In the green room?
Yeah, it's the chat.
What do they do in the green room?
It's not doing, it's the way they talk about women. And it's not how they would talk about women to women. And it's not, it does, for my mind, it doesn't always feel like that's how they want to speak. But it's this sort of strange, it's like sometimes I pretend to be into food, like how salads are made. You know, if there's a group of people who are really into salads, I'll go, yeah, I like a finer cut on my tomato. You know. So you get the sense that, you know, there's guys in these rooms who aren't, you know, really comfortable with the way that women are spoken about. And they, you know, I've witnessed it. I've witnessed this sort of weird double, you know, other world.
And we had this moral reckoning around race in this country where if somebody says something racist in the room, somebody else will say, what do you, don't talk that way. Like, that's not okay. But men don't do that with other men. They either just disappear or they get quiet, but they don't call out a man in front of other men.
I certainly wasn't going to. That's the other thing. It was unsafe.
It's unsafe, yeah.
It's unsafe for me to just go, hey, guys, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, respect the ladies. Like that's, you know, it wasn't always, it didn't always feel safe, you know, particularly, you know, before, when I was younger and before I was, what was the word? Famous. And, you know, so I was in open mic nights and, you know, these sort of things. And, you know, it wasn't actually very safe. It's not a safe job for women half the time. You know, you're late night, you're traveling late nights and, you know, you rely on these guys for lifts to weird venues out of town. So it was, you know.
You kind of go along. In fact, I don't even think it's safe for a man to say that in a room of men because that's the exact kind of thing that in some circles would be considered a challenge to somebody's masculinity and could be a way of starting a fight. So this is patriarchy, you know, this is patriarchy, and liberal guys are part of it too.
Mm-hmm. I want to read a couple of the principles of Topple.
Okay.
A revolution must be intersectional. Be chill. I'll elaborate on that one. No one's in trouble. No one throws anyone under the bus. Promote good vibes. It's okay to move quickly, but if you're feeling under pressure, try slowing down. Good advice. Gather often. Be brave. Principles over product. So how do you uphold those principles, and how do you get Hollywood to listen?
Well, I'm really, really lucky that this story about my trans parent happened at just the moment when Amazon was ready to take a risk on a certain kind of content, and audiences were ready to stream a certain way when they could watch it whenever they wanted. I mean, before my parent came out, I was, for 10 years, pitching shows about unlikable Jewish women. Nobody cared. And in many ways, I like to joke that it took a man playing an unlikable Jewish woman that I had written for anybody to actually be interested. Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you think about it. Really, you know, I've been writing transparent inversion. There's so many Sophies and Allies and Aries and, you know, these characters, they've all been the same. You know, they've all been these women who felt like people I knew, you know. So I don't think you can get Hollywood to listen. I think you can do what Hannah did, which is make your thing, find your audience, create your own growing sense of importance, and Hollywood cares about data. I mean, Hollywood likes data. Data.
Oh, data, yeah. Yeah.
That's what they care about.
I bought my own data. I mean, stand-ups is an odd thing because for someone like me, I'm from a very low socioeconomic background. I have autism, which meant that I always knew I was intelligent, but I didn't leave any proof. So, you know, theatre wasn't an option for me. You know, getting into, you know, television wasn't an option for me. But stand-up comedy is a place where people from, you know, really disadvantaged backgrounds can find it. It's harder for, you know, it's hard, but you can because there's less people will stop you. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, but it is a place where someone like myself, I was homeless when I first began doing stand-up. It was something to do. And, you know, but I can do it, you know, and you can support yourself, you know, whilst going, you know, because you can think something, write something, and perform something immediately, which is, I don't think there's many other art forms where that can happen. So it is kind of, I think that's the only way I could have got. Bless you. The only reason I'm famous. No, so that's the thing. It's just like, I wrote that show, I performed that show, I toured that show, from tiny little venues up until, it was very much a live show before it was filmed. And the reason I think that I was able to do that is because you don't get notes. You don't get studio notes back on a stand-up show. The audience very much tells you. So I, first of all, got really good at manipulating audiences. And then I was able to do that. But I think it's not true to all forms of television.
But you're not quitting.
No, I'm not quitting at all. No. Like I said, the reason I said that was because I knew a stand-up comedian doing a show like that was going to be reviewed as doing a one-woman show, a bit of a monologue. And nobody would dare level that at a guy. There have been other comedians who've pushed the form and touched on dark subjects, and they're genius. And so my way of saying it is like, I don't care what you talk, how you frame. I don't care what genre you're putting this in, because genres in the whole history of art, genres have been put in place to discriminate. Like high art was painting, sculpture, needlework, not high art. So it's about access, and all women artists, female artists, historically have always had to defy genre in order to even have access to art forms. So I have no problem with people who are saying it's not really stand-up, and I'm like, it's not really the point.
I have some great needle art from Etsy, though.
Pardon?
I have some great needle art from
I'm a big fan of haberdashery, don't get me wrong. But it's the low art, that's what's been, we only, galleries are places where we, collect art that we consider as high art. The rest goes into a museum as something, not so important people put out. And I think that's a real, issue of cultural framework. But I think we're living at a time, the first time in history where, women and people of color and all sorts of minorities can tell their own stories without mediation and reach an audience without mediation. And that's what makes this an exciting time, because, for such a long time, it was so hard for others to be even educated, to have access to platforms where you can reach a wider audience. So, it's both an exhilarating time and a frightening time, but I think for me that is what gives me hope, is that people can tell their own stories and it be heard.
Jill, what would be different if you were beginning to write and pitch Transparent today? What has changed in the culture?
That's a good question. If I was beginning to write and pitch Transparent today, what would be different in what I would write? Or how is the culture different? Or who you would
cast, or how you
obviously I wouldn't cast a cis man anymore as Maura.
And you wouldn't have to, right?
Well, yeah, it would just be such an absurd thought. The issues around my casting of Jeffrey Tambor, I think it was easy to say we wouldn't be able to make it if we didn't have a star. That's not even a good excuse anymore. It's just simply not okay ever to cast somebody cis as somebody trans. But yeah, as a culture, we didn't know that yet, and sadly, I had to have my education in public, and I'm constantly asking the trans community for forgiveness, for what was a very painful thing for a lot of trans women and a lot of trans people. I think that I work with the issue of representation now all the time, where we make it really clear with this organization, 50/50 by 2020. Let's say, for example, if somebody is queer, they're being played by somebody queer. If somebody is Mexican, they're being played by somebody who's Mexican. But the issue with Jeffrey playing Maura was that trans women face the discrimination of people actually thinking that they are men dressing up. And so when you're acting and a man is dressing up, when acting people are dressing up, and even that joke that I made about I've been writing Jewish women for years, it took a man playing one, that's even a dangerous joke to play because of the way that trans women, some people assume or accuse them of, playing a role. So it was such a dangerous experiment, ultimately. It did a lot of good in that what I think the family did around Maura and what the tone of Transparent did was create this kind of cool kids table around queerness and transness. I think before that, culturally, there was Orange is the New Black, but that was a trans woman who was in prison. And then we had this sort of, trans women on Phil Donahue, and there was this kind of spectacle. I talk a lot these days about It's Pat, who was a non-binary character who was ridiculed. And in fact, sometimes when I've been on this book tour and I found myself being the sort of voice of non-binary, explaining what it means to be non-binary to people, I sometimes just it's like Pat, but not sad. But trans people were mainly used as jokes. If somebody's gender wasn't legible, that was supposed to be funny. And what I think Transparent did was create just a family, a whole group of people who all kind of not only got their parents' transness, but were also kind of more fucked up than their parent and had bigger wounds and were acting out worse, and that created this context around Maura, where Maura and her transness was the least complicated part of the story.
And you write in the book about sort of this incredible moment of feeling like there was this excitement around toppling the patriarchy as Me Too was rising up, radical feminism, and sort of simultaneously finding out about the allegations against him.
Yeah.
And how you processed that.
Yeah.
How did you process that?
I mean, I didn't really process it when it was happening. It was more of a sort of utter state of shock, where that feeling of I can't breathe, what's happening. I really had been, I think in the book I say in the morning and then in the afternoon, but it felt like that. It may not have been the same day, but being part of the Time's Up movement, being in the room with all of these people, all of my heroes, and putting Post-its on the board, imagining how we were going to topple the patriarchy. And I remember handing out the topple principles at the Time's Up meeting and being like, guys, I've been thinking about this for 20 years. Yeah. They're like, so have all of us. I'm like, great, let's do this. And one of the things I put on a Post-it note was unlock all NDAs. I've been really obsessed with not only NDAs, but kind of imagining the amount of money that men have paid women to be silent. And in this sort of feeling I have about this corroborated male gaze, two men pointing at a woman and saying she wants it, I would start to imagine when I heard about some of these settlements, men sitting in a room, male lawyers saying, we got to protect our buddy. This woman's got a story to tell. Let's pay her to not tell the story. Women have been being paid to be quiet while men are being paid to tell their stories. And I was obsessed with this notion of unlocking all NDAs. I was like, maybe we should just give them all book deals, and pay them more than their NDAs, and just find ways for women to tell their stories, pay them to tell their stories. And then, later, potentially within the same week that I was saying that, someone said, you need to check out Facebook. There's an allegation about Jeffrey. Yeah, but I think I was in a really weird position being somebody who was out there kind of just doing this, and then had to really fight with myself when my first reaction was, I want to protect my show. And how can I protect my show? Oh my God, my baby and this family. And then I had this other thing going on of what's called the HQ70s. It's like, for Dewey Decimal nerds, the HQ70s are the queer Jewish part of the library. It's like where you'd find, Magnus Hirschfeld and Sarah Schulman. And the show, I was like, but this is the only queer Jewish thing in the culture, and it's so big, and it's being seen by all these countries, and so if this happens to this show, the queerness and the Jewishness will be tainted by this accusation. So I had these like really defended responses instead of the response that I wish I had, which was to put my arm around Trace and put my arm around Van and say, thank you for speaking. Later, I was able to realize that, like, had Catherine Hahn leveled the accusation, had Gabby Hoffman leveled the accusation, I would have immediately supported them. But because Van and Trace were trans, still my own subtle trans misogyny was at play. It was still there. And I had to, I still had to remind myself over and over and over again, this thing that I talk about, femaleness, femininity, and feminist, disqualifies women from being believed. And it's in all of us. We're raised in this patriarchy, and so I think our first response, my first response as somebody whose job it was to think as, a producer and a director, my first response was like, I've got to find a way to make this not be true.
Do you think, I guess I get asked this on stage constantly and I never quite know how to respond, but is there reconciliation for men like that? Is there rehabilitation? What is your response when you get asked that question?
It's a big one. I think that obviously there should be or can be. I think the kind of reconciliation and rehabilitation that would be necessary is much, much bigger and much, much more complex than any of the men who are looking for a way back in have even begun to entertain, that have even begun. Like, it's not okay to slip back on stage and see if you can tell jokes, because it means that you haven't heard anything that a lot of people you love are saying. It's not okay to try to slip in. I think the appropriate thing is to find the feminist activists in their lives and say, please, tell me what to do. And if these people are nice enough to spend their time helping men figure out what to do, they're very lucky. Because a lot of times when I get into these conversations and people go, what about men? I go, I don't fucking care. You probably have something to say about that.
Oh, no, I was just saying, get out of the patriarchy.
Sorry. Yeah. No, it's this question of how men should be educated. It's like, I'm not asking people of color to educate me. I'm gonna figure out for myself what my white privilege looks like. I'm not waiting for people of color to tell me what my white privilege looks like. Men shouldn't be waiting for women to teach them. Men should be as actively trying to figure out what their male privilege looks like as white people are looking at their own race privilege.
Thoughts?
Men don't ask me that question. I think they keep a healthy distance these days. I think what's really frustrating right now is it's such an insensitive question when we're continually hearing stories from survivors we're just listening to them and immediately just sort of going, all right, it doesn't matter. And until we have a cultural conversation where it said, it does matter, the pain matters, then I'm sorry men are a bit sad and confused, but come on, toughen up. Like, you're supposed to be the tough ones. But I just see, the amount of pain that women have held makes us the stronger sex. I'm sorry. But, in the Kavanaugh hearings, that guy was weird emotional. Like, to the point of, like, is he okay? Like, like, I understand that he was, you know, there, you know, it was tense. But that was, he was, like, and I'm like, because that guy has never had to justify himself. That man, and men are taught that they, you know, this is a whole idea that women are emotional and men are reasonable. Men are the reasonable, right? This is a long held belief. You know, men have access to more reason. And so I think men are taught that they don't have emotions. So when they have one, they think it's reasonable. So, like, so when they feel the emotion of anger, they go, this is reasonable. And it's not, you know. I think men need to just hang on to it for a bit and then ask. That's a little theory I've got going at the moment.
I want to tell everyone we're going to go to questions in a bit, and there are 2 microphones, one on the left, your left, and right. We're going to start on this side, so if you have a burning question, make your way over. I will remind you that a question ends in a question mark, please. And Jill, what do you hope people take away from the book? This is not your first book, in fact.
That's true, yes. This is my second book. My first book is called Tiny Ladies in Shiny Pants. And, oh, yay.
And there's similarities.
Yeah, in terms of what the book's about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Thematic.
Thematic, yeah. It's personal narrative, and then my haranguing about consent is kind of my stock and trade. Yeah, I guess what I really like is I love when people say, you know, I got out a pen and I started underlining and I started dog-earing pages, and then I wanted to show somebody this. And I love the idea that people would get into arguments or conversations about things that they read. And that, you know, I think it's interesting that feminism has gotten to a place where women understand what intersectional feminism looks like, and trans women and cis women are talking about femaleness and womanness, but yet no trans men are part of the conversation with men, and no masculine-leaning butch women are part of the conversation with men. We are not part of the conversation about masculinity, and we want to be. Not that I want to teach men, but I do wish that men would read women's books. I never see men tweeting about Roxane Gay. I never see men tweeting about Rebecca Traister. I don't know really any men who are using social media to make sure that people read this book, or even reading this book and say, you know, there are a few. But for the most part, you know, men are considering this women's work and calling it feminism. And actually, this is, you know, one of the this moment in time where our Supreme Court now is not going to be trusted because we elected a judge in a moment when our culture can't agree about what consent is. This is, you know, this is a moment for everybody. So I really want the book to be taken in as something with political ideas in it and not just feminist ideas.
I'm going to go to a question from Facebook. Catherine.
We love Facebook.
Facebook's
Might
struggling.
be from Russia.
This is to both of you.
Uh-oh.
I know. Did you have any idea that the impact of your respective shows, Nanette and Transparent, would have broadly on the culture?
No. For me, it's hard to believe in hindsight, but when I wrote the show, it felt very dangerous. And it's certainly the first, you know, few months of performing it in front of live audiences, I felt very unsafe. You know, never once did I feel invulnerable, but particularly in the first, you know, little while of performing it live, I felt unsafe on stage. So I had no way of knowing that I was going to be heard to this level. Like, it is beyond my, there's no way I could imagine this. And that's done kind of an incredible thing. And I think I've stumbled upon what's at the heart of why it's so difficult to get over trauma, why it's so why we need, you know, why people get triggered is because, you know, it's well known that we need a coherent narrative to help get through trauma. But what we haven't realized is we've just given ourselves these coherent narratives, and the world hasn't heard them. And through touring the show, and then of course once it hits, you know, the Netflix situation, I was heard. My story was heard, and began as a show that was full of pain, full of my own pain and unresolved trauma, has been heard and held, and, you know, in some ways, you know, echoed in a very loving way. And it's, you know, while it took a toll and it was exhausting, that has had an incredibly healing effect on me. And so what I, you know, personally think is just like, if, you know, if only culturally we could offer that. Just, you know, you shouldn't have to do what I did just to be heard. We're worried about freedom of speech, but we really need to understand how we culturally listen and care. But I had no reason to believe that I was going to become famous. That was, no. Short answer, no.
I'm just going to go ahead and say no, because I want to hear the next question.
Okay.
No, I did not know.
Okay, so start making your way to microphones, please. Kathy, also from Facebook, a real person, I think. What makes you laugh, Hannah?
It's not a lot. Like, because I'm more confused. You know, that's where I'm coming from. Like, I don't know. Like, cat videos on YouTube. You know, puns, actually. If I didn't have such, you know, trauma to talk about, I reckon I'd be just total puns. That's it. Puns. I fucking love them.
Do you have a good one? Puns.
Puns.
What's your favorite pun?
Well, you need a context, you know. It's just like any, you know. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
Question. Yes.
I'm not a pundit.
Get it.
Hi. So as a young screenwriter who's interested in pursuing stories that are outside of the mainstream, to two creators who have successfully created really zeitgeisty, wonderful things that would not have been considered mainstream at the time and potentially have changed the mainstream, how do you get people to trust you? How do you get the Netflixes and the Amazons to be on your side and take a chance on you?
Well, it's interesting because when I went to make the Transparent pilot, I had just come back from Sundance and had a feature film at Sundance called Afternoon Delight. Thanks, whoever saw it. And you know, Afternoon Delight took a huge amount of energy to write the script and raise the money and get it made and get it cast, and you know, got into Sundance and all these things that are your markers as you're attempting to quote unquote make it. And then got to Sundance and really had the feeling, you know, that we were going to sort of go to that next level, whatever that would be, a bidding war, some way that the movie would be like a success. But then got a really awful review from The Hollywood Reporter. A straight cis man reviewed the movie, didn't like it, and did what Lily Loofbrow calls the male gaze, which is kind of a nothing to see here. You know, doesn't take seriously, you know, a lot of cis men, straight cis men, simply just by ignoring something or deciding that something doesn't deserve any kind of real interest, will kind of dispose of it, male glance. And I really left Sundance, and then, you know, I ended up winning the directing award, but I still ended up leaving Sundance, believe it or not, feeling like a failure, because the movie really didn't sell for a huge amount of money and I didn't have a big distribution deal. And then I went, you know, and then after the movie was finished, I wrote Transparent, and I really wrote it from a place of personal, just, I'm gonna write this family for a place for me to live, just to sort of entertain and satisfy myself. And then when I went around to sell it everywhere, you know, pass. And then when I got to Amazon, the person who was deciding to buy Transparent had seen Afternoon Delight. And I said something to him like, here's what I can do with this script. I can warranty the tone, because so many projects get lost in the tone between the director and the writer and the producer. I'm gonna be all three, and I know who my hair and makeup person is, I know who my cinematographer is, I know who my set designer is. You can see how it looks in this movie, and that's what I'm gonna do in this pilot. And so having had this thing that felt like a failure, but actually was the key to somebody trusting me, you know, I think it's a ladder. You keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and you know, don't allow the failures to make you stop.
Hi, Jill, Hannah. I just had a baby, and the baby has a vagina.
Oh.
Yeah, and I had to get a passport, and on the passport I had to say male or female. And ever since I did that, I've just been thinking, how do I make space for the gender of this baby?
You should have just put male.
I should have, just to fuck around.
It's a way to do it. I mean, you get percentage chance that the baby's male, even though it has a vagina.
Right. I guess my question is, as this baby is growing, how do I make space with language and clothes and people?
I'm assuming you can get another passport down the track. Like, they have it, your baby's passport won't last. Like, that's gonna be tough when they're 40. No, it is me. I think you can let yourself off the hook there with the passport.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
There are people actually who are raising gender-free children. In fact, Topple just signed up a writer, her name is Kyle, and she has a website called Raising Zoomer. And there's a group of parents actually who are raising their children without gender. In fact, Kyle hasn't even told her own parents what their grandchild's gender is, and their grandchild is now 5. So I think anytime you can just, you know, provide that neutral landscape and not, you know, and allow the child to follow their own bliss without some of the things that go on girls, which are you're so cute, you're so pretty, a good girl, you know, and you know, strong boys, like just, you know, never using that language, I think would be a really good start.
Thank you.
That sort of plays well into what Michael asks, which is, why do you think it's still important to talk about gender identity today? And will we ever get to a place where that's not necessary?
Well, I hope we can. You know, like I see gender as, you know, it's a very difficult conversation to be having at the moment, because for such a long time it's been an assumed binary, and it's people are comfortable with that because they don't believe they've seen evidence contrary to it. So that's why you have people saying, they're just making it up, this is new, this is I've had, because it's been invisible. But it's a conversation that has to be had before it can not be had, and we need to make sure we have it properly, we have this conversation properly. And also with as much care for young people as possible. I've had a lot of difficulty with gender in my time, but as an older person, you know, I really believe I'm a foot soldier for the future. You know, I'll take some for the team if it means that, you know, gender and identity should be a joy for young people as they work out everything about themselves. You know, so I think older people really have a responsibility to get over themselves and how they view things and be kind in this conversation.
Hi there, huge fan. So yeah, my question is actually kind of similar. I have a backup question, which is, what do you do about Kavanaugh? But we can get there if we need it.
That's a great question.
It is a great question. I'll just ask the other one just in case. But it's kind of a similar concept, I think, around gender, but then with sexuality, I think. One of the things that I've found is that I've recently come out as bi, or any of the languages around that. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. If you can tell by the hair. But one of the things that I find really interesting is that it's kind of a unique space. I won't say it's necessarily harder than anything else, but I think that there's a lot of tendency for people to want to put you in a category. And I think that it's very hard to categorize yourself and say, you know, like, oh, well, no, I date women now, but I also date men, but sometimes I date women. And so I'm curious what you guys see for kind of an end state for this, where, you know, should I ever even have to explain myself? And I think it really is similar with, you know, trans people. Should a trans person ever have to walk up and say, oh, I'm, you know, a proud trans person? Or is the end state that a man has become a woman and just goes about their life and no one needs to know?
Well, I was having this conversation. We did a feminist debating last night with Masha Gessen and Eileen Miles at the Wing, and we've been, it was amazing. And we, asked this question, aren't we all excited about the X designation on the driver's license? I'm so excited in California that I'm going to go and be able to change my gender to X in January. And I think there's going to be an X gender designation on birth certificates here. And so yes, we all think like this is a great idea, but then one of the things that Masha Gessen mentioned was like X only exists because of M and F, and that maybe if there was no M or F, we wouldn't need an X. And I argued, maybe we need an X for 10 years so that people can really recognize that there are people who don't fit into either one, perhaps even offer bathrooms to people, locker rooms, places for people to be who don't want to have to be in those all-male or all-female situations. But I do think that, I can find more, less and less use for gender every day. I can just never think of a situation that needs to be all-male or all-female. So even when you say, I date men, I date women, it's like, so what's wrong with non-binary people? You don't date us?
I have, so I've done that too. Exactly. It creates a hard place for you to define what how to say that you date women while dating men while also dating anyone. So yeah, that's the question. Kind of how do you define everyone? How do I say I date anyone and it doesn't matter as long as they're human? I don't date dogs yet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what do we call that? Pansexual, bisexual, pansexual. It's called pansexual. Introduce yourself to the next person.
It could just be sexual. It could just be sexual. Yeah. I find the X triggering because I failed algebra.
And also when people say check the X box, I think of the gaming, so Xbox.
Everything's problematic.
Yeah.
We introduced ladies and gentlemen at the start.
I heard that. Ladies and gentlemen and non-binary humans. You need to change the thing, right? Yeah, people can say folks instead of ladies and gentlemen.
Breathers. Welcome, breathers.
Okay. Hi, Hannah and Jill. Thanks for having this, or being here.
I think you're having us. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about my racial privilege as a white person, and particularly a white woman as a public school teacher here in New York City, teaching predominantly students of color and low-income students. I guess I could add my class privilege as well to that. And I'm wondering, how do you think about your feminism as not only women, but as, I assume, white women? I don't know actually how you identify racially, but I'm assuming that.
Oh, I'm the oppressor. Yeah, definitely white, yep. How do I do that?
Sure.
I think the conversation, and I think everyone has a responsibility to understand their own power, and it's very difficult to do that when you feel disempowered. It doesn't matter where, my life, I've been disempowered and really disadvantaged a lot. So it's very easy for me to not see that I have power, but I absolutely do. Coming from a place like Australia, where structural violence against the indigenous population there is horrific. And so I absolutely have to understand my power where it is. I think it's a personal responsibility to just recognize where you have power and do your absolute best to not be, you have a responsibility not to be ignorant about it, because that's where a lot of violence, and microaggressions and all these things come from. I think it's a matter of educating yourself around your own privilege and power. I don't know how you do that. You're the teacher. You're probably better at educating yourself. But yeah, I just, I think it's a daily thing. You have to do it every day. I don't even brush my teeth every day. Shouldn't have said that. I was doing so well.
You both, so this is an incredible audience of, I think, probably foot soldiers who want to engage in your movement to topple the patriarchy. So what is your call to action for this crowd?
I'm really into, we've been talking about a golf course takeover.
Look, I'm gonna,
why don't you pitch it? Here's the plan, guys.
This is an idea. I used to play golf. I used to play golf when I was younger, and so I know, I can say that the worst people play golf. It's really, elitism and misogyny on a genteel walk. My idea is almost overnight we destroy all golf courses all around the world. Plant them, let's bring back the bees, some sustainable farming on golf courses. And if we do this in one movement, all those men who do all those power deals on the weekends, they don't know how to workshop what's just happened to them. They can't get together anymore and ignore their whole families for weekends at a time. They have to then just they're going to say to their wife, they've ruined the golf course. And the wife's just going to go, I don't care. And so they're going to it's a real good start to disempowerment. Yeah. And we need to bring back the bees. We're in trouble.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to similar kinds of direct action. I want to do things where we use the promise of the internet to stay in touch with each other and create some sort of secret network where we are really, continuing to convene real plans for actual. I take this very seriously. I know it's funny, but I think it would be so easy. Jesus did it. He didn't have the internet. A lot of people...
didn't even play golf back then.
A lot of people started social movements without the internet. And we have this way of speaking to one another. So I do think that giant, collective, secretive, so if anybody's tweeting or whatever, don't talk about this part. But giant, collective plans where...
Start a Masonic lodge.
Yeah, the Masonic lodges are crazy. It's nuts. But we've been marching, so we know how to get out, and we know how to do things quickly. We did make those pussy hats really quick. And we did make those things that you could look at the eclipse really quick. It was in 3 days it's an eclipse. Now there's all these, we got them. Somehow we were all making them. So we know how to do things really quickly, so let's just listen to each other and come up with some radical shit.
I would say, though, in a moment like this, it seems like it's too much to change. It seems overwhelming, and I think you focus on your sphere of influence. And that's the premise that I wrote Nanette in. I didn't expect it to go this big. But at the time, it's I have a live audience in front of me every night. That is my sphere of influence, and I took that seriously. Every single one of you in this room has a sphere of influence. It may just be one person, but that is the action that you can take. You have to think about how you can affect those around you, and that does count for something. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. Hannah Gadsby, Jill Soloway. She wants it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.